Boring, a 6-letter word that not only defines the state of a story, but is also a messenger of death. Regardless of how long a story has progressed, regardless of how interesting a concept might be, everything has the potential to fall into this category. But what makes a story boring? Though we will not go into every detail and concept that can attribute to this, I will be going over one of the most prominent, a word powerful enough to spell the core difference between sengoku youko and a show off of the Hallmark channel. This is done not by looking at the differences in story concepts, but by strictly looking at the core way each story is told, and that word is status quo. Think of the status quo being a metronome. A show centered around the exact same tempo cannot rely solely on said tempo for an extended period of time. To do so would eliminate the possibility of an unexpected change. To eliminate change means eliminating the story. Even when a story does provide change, if it doesn't interrupt the tempo enough, then it will quickly fall into the camp of expectations and boredom. Imagine any show, regardless of genre and artistic medium, they will all follow this concept. The start of Frieren has the show following a similar tempo. They go to some place, the characters bond, then they leave to continue their journey. If this was the entire series, then the show would not be so beloved. Instead, midway through they introduce a small-scale war to one of the cities, mixing up the average tempo of the story. Not only is the story told in a darker light, the way that the characters act is also fueled towards disrupting the metronome. After leaving said arc, they start to enter a similar tempo, only for it to be disrupted once again by the Wizard Tournament arc. How about Jujutsu Kaizen? The entire Shibuya arc didn't just change the tempo, it erased the metronome and rewrote it. How about Demon Slayer? They went from 1 numbers demon in the entertainment arc to 2 in the new arc, while also drastically changing the cast of characters. How about Kaiju number 8? He gets caught by the defense force and is nearly killed by the director general. As you can see, any good story that plans on lasting longer than a few episodes has to disrupt the status quo. The last thing you want is someone to expect everything that's going to happen in the story. You can think of this like an explosion. Each change in the story drastic enough to destroy the metronome can be classified as a large boom. But after a while the dust settles, and a new status quo is formed. It is not enough for you to simply let out one tempo-defining explosion, but to let them out consecutively. The better spaced out they are, the longer the story will hook its audience with the prospects of endless possibilities future explosions may hold. And I haven't seen a show do it as frequently and as impactful as I have Sengoku Youko. The story of Sengoku Youko is not perfect, that is not a statement I am willing to fight anybody on, but the show is a good example of large and consecutive tempo changes. Every time you think the story will follow a similar trend, they create a narrative-defining moment. So let's look at these moments and classify them by their strength. But first, let's define the possible differences in strength. Number 1, a metronome-shattering moment, something that changes the narrative far beyond anyone's expectations. Number 2, tempo-shattering moment, something almost as strong as 1 but not strong enough. Number 3, tempo change, something that shakes up the narrative enough to change core aspects of it without changing the story entirely. And number 4, tempo shake. This is something that is a slight surprise but not strong enough to change the core story. If a metronome shattering moment is the nuke, then this is a pop rock. In episode 1 of the series, we get a solid foundation of where the story was headed. We get introduced to the 3 main characters and get to see their goals for going on this journey. For some reason, the premise of this series reminded me a lot of Inuyasha. It's probably due to the way Jinka and Tamayoko act around each other. Also, it doesn't help that Jinka looks a lot like Inuyasha when he enters his demon state, but I'm getting off track. The premise set in episode 1 is that Jinka and Yoko are on a journey to bring about peace through good deeds. So they will go to a village, save somebody, then only ask for them to do nice things to other travelers. In episode 3, however, they immediately have a shift in the story's narrative. If it wasn't for it being so soon, I would classify this as a tempo change, but since it happened fairly early on, it's only a tempo shake. The moment I'm referring to is when Jinka and Yoko head to the monk's residence only to be nearly killed. This changes the story into the real narrative. It's almost as if the first 2 episodes were for introducing the cast of characters, while the 3rd episode was to introduce the story. After escaping, the cast of characters, including a new character by the name of Shakuyaku, what? Including a new character by the name of Shakuyaku, are being hunted by monk hitmen. We follow this trend for a while, meeting new friends and enemies alike until coming across episode 7. In this episode, Shakuyaku sacrifices herself to save a mother giving birth. This death came out of nowhere, only being foreshadowed during Shakuyaku's interactions with the mother. This death not only changes the tone of the show, but also changes Shinsuke's personality. Those changes had a strong enough effect of the tempo for me to classify it as a tempo change. After that, we get to meet a mountain goddess in the tail end of episode 8. During episode 9 and the start of episode 10, the characters are undergoing training. While this is happening, the strongest two monks are hot on their trails, one of which being a young child by the name of Senya. He's believed to have thousands of demons stuffed inside of his body, while also being taught morality through a hitman monk. Shinsuke had a chance to kill Senya, but refused to kill a child born into the role of a demon. It is also here where we see a human side of Senya we've never seen before. He spares Shinsuke's life and leaves. After each member finishes their training, the mountain goddess wants the three of them to go out and attack the monks' headquarters. But Youko, seeing that the goddess needs them alive, decides they should attack the monks there and force the mountain goddess to help them. They do so, resulting in a tempo-shattering moment. Jinka loses an arm, gains an extra ability, and the mountain goddess now demands one of their souls as compensation once their journey is over. That means, regardless of the outcome, the entire ending of the anime is coated with this omnipresent bad omen. So even if they save the day, it will still result in a sad ending. There are ways to work around this, but until those become clear, this is the predestined end result. That, on top of everything else happening this episode, brings us to a tempo-shattering moment. If you haven't noticed yet, the impact of the narrative has been constantly and exponentially increasing. Every few episodes, we have something that affects the status quo, and every time it's affected, it becomes more and more impactful. Now that we are at Tier 2 impact, let's see what classifies as a Tier 1. I won't be going into perfect detail about what goes on in these next couple of episodes, just enough to get my point across. In episode 11 through 13, we have Jinka losing himself to his rapid accumulation of power. He starts affecting his brain and eating a mountain god's flesh, unable to control his now induced animalistic nature. On top of that, we get to see strange shadowy figures never before seen in the show. Not even the mountain goddess knows what they are. The end of these episodes results in Jinka becoming the strongest being we've ever seen in the show. This also means that since he lost his mind, he's no longer friendly. Which means, that's right, in part 2 of the story, Jinka is the main bad guy. You'll never guess who our protagonist becomes. Senya, the boy who has over 1,000 demons stuffed into his body and was referred to as the Demon Lord, is now our protagonist. He's the only other person with the potential to rival Jinka. On top of that, his new guardian is Shinsuke. The drastic shift in characters and narrative is so great that I don't believe anybody will disagree with me when I put this as a metronome-shattering moment. It's no longer telling nearly the same story, and it's not even involving the same characters anymore. It's such a drastic change that anybody could classify this as an entirely different manga. The only thing they would have to change is the world that it takes place in. Because of the story's willingness to increase its impact every few episodes, the audience is always left uncertain of what the next episode might bring. It never allows for the status quo to fully form before shaking things up. Another thing that a steadily increasing impact does to the story is give us a proper sense of the stakes rising. The stronger the sense of urgency present in the story, the stronger the narrative becomes. Not only is the urgency rising, but it's becoming a layered narrative. Act 1 followed Jinka, so everything involving Jinka has become multifaceted in its importance. Characters and places are no longer representative of the episode spent specifically building those characters and places. Look at Shinsuke, for example. Before Act 2 started, he was seen as a samurai incapable of protecting anything. He vowed himself to revenge, but after getting revenge on the person who killed Shakuyaku, he was liberated from that feeling. Now, after Act 2 started, he's once again lost in despair due to his inadequacy. He was unable to save Jinka, becoming one of the reasons why Jinka lost control. He simply drinks his worries away, becoming even more incapable of protecting anyone, including Senya. He's also seen as a guardian to Senya and Tsukiko, a role he never had before. Because of how large of an impact the climax of Act 1 was, it ultimately resulted in an equally large impact across the characters and world involved in the story. Without the presence of these moments, the story would divulge in repetitiveness. The narrative would become stale and lose all uniqueness due to it repeating the only thing that made it stand out. There are some shows that revolve around repetitiveness and become popular. These shows are not popular because of the story that they are telling, but because of the feeling of tranquility they represent. Think of Hallmark, for example, a company that first started selling postcards, now stepping into the TV business. Much like a postcard, these shows are not unique. Most can be whittled down into a handful of outplayed categories. But what they do bring to their 70-year-old audience is safety. They always preach family values, they always have the girl winning the guy over, they always have the killer caught, etc, etc. Whenever you put on the Hallmark channel, it's not so you can be completely encapsulated by the story as it unfolds. It's mostly because you want something playing in the background, something you can kind of focus on but still understand where the story is going. Something safe. I don't want safety. Nobody telling a story should want safety. I want boundaries pushed, themes explored, and completely unfathomable events to take place. If writers are too afraid to push the boundaries, then every story that will be written has already been written throughout the thousands of years of language has existed. I want every writer that is okay with this to quit. Because no matter what you write, you will create nothing. Thank you guys for coming and watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and as always, Johnny.